Greetings and welcome back to the podcast. This episode, we are joined by Mr. Donovan Bailey, two-time Olympic gold medalist, three-time world champion, and two-time world record holder in sprinting. Mr. Donovan Bailey once held the world record for the 100-meter sprint with a recorded time of 9.84 seconds to become the Olympic gold medalist at the 1996 Summer Olympic Games in Atlanta. Mr. Donovan Bailey is also the founder and CEO of Bailey Inc., a global brand-related company specializing in real estate investments, brand partnerships, speed and power consulting, business ventures, and media broadcasting. Mr. Donovan Bailey is a commentator for major media outlets such as the BBC, CBC, and EuroSports on international sporting competitions. Mr. Donovan Bailey was also named a member of the Order of Ontario, an officer to the Order of Canada, has received a star on Canada's Walk of Fame, and has authored a new book titled Undisputed, A Champion's Life. This episode was recorded at a recent Classroom Champions event organized by Steve Messler, which at this single event alone raised approximately $250,000 to provide athlete mentors to classrooms across Western Canada. Among other things, we discussed Mr. Donovan Bailey's slow start and nearly running a 9.61 at the 1996 Summer Olympics, growing and training in Calgary, and reflections on a sprinting career. Enjoy. This episode is brought to you by Galatea Technologies. Galatea is a software company based in Calgary that is focused on helping producers better manage their fluid logistics. Galatea enables field operators and truck drivers with the ability to make the optimal decision on every waste, water, or clean oil load, resulting in 20% savings on trucking and disposal costs. The Galatea platform makes it easy to create digital truck tickets, manifests, and shipping documents that automatically flow through the field data capture and finance systems. Galatea's platform is used by over 50% of Canadian producers, 600 trucking companies, and hundreds of disposal locations. Visit GalateaTech.com to learn more about how to optimize that last line on your lease op. This episode is brought to you by Canada Action, whose belief is that the Canadian oil and natural gas industry is a force of good in the world, and that history will look back upon the sector favorably. Canadian energy plays a critical role in our society by reinforcing global energy security, underpinning Canadian economic prosperity, and setting the benchmark for environmental leadership. Get your free stickers at buildcanadaup.ca to show your support, or follow Canada Action on social media. This episode is brought to you by the Canadian Gas Association. The Canadian Gas Association represents Canada's natural gas delivery industry, whose members include distribution companies, transmission companies, equipment manufacturers, and other service providers. The Canadian Gas Association members deliver safe, reliable, and affordable natural gas to meet 38% of Canada's energy needs. Visit cga.ca to learn more about Canada's natural gas. Good afternoon, Mr. Donovan Bailey. Thank you very much for doing this. I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for having me, man. It's always good. I'm out in Calgary, and the weather was decent for past few days, and apparently it's snowing today, but, all good, all good.
As I mentioned, I just finished reading your book, so I thought we could structure the conversation around some authentic questions that I had after reading it. So,
absolutely, no problem. I mean, my book, Undisputed, certainly it was a tough task to write a book, but it's been incredible. A lot of people are reading it and sharing stories and remembering things.
On the subject of running, after I learned that you could do this interview this afternoon, I ran halfway across town. So apologies if I'm sweating and I look a little awkward, but...
Don't worry about it, man. Don't worry about it. No excuses needed. The fact is that you set a goal to get this done, so you're getting it done, and that's all that matters.
Everybody knows you as a two-time Olympic gold medalist, among other athletic accomplishments. But if you were to define yourself nowadays, how would you describe yourself?
Oh, geez. Well, I mean, today I'm a father, a philanthropist, businessman. In short order, that's what I would be today. And clearly, as you just mentioned, I am an author. Maybe I dabble in a little bit of sports journalism. I work for CBC. The Olympics is coming up. I'm excited about what the team's going to do. But today, that probably encompasses most of how I define myself today.
You grew up in an idyllic setting in Jamaica. How did that experience shape you right from the beginning in kind of central Jamaican, kind of beautiful area?
I grew up on a farm. So, I mean, I'm in Calgary. Funny. the only difference here between a farm here, and maybe a farm in Jamaica is maybe the topography and definitely the weather. But ultimately, I grew up around animals, plants, trees, and it was incredible. I grew up, we call it the country, out in the country in Jamaica. There were only 3 things to do. It was school, church, and sports. It would be quite difficult to get into any sort of, as a rambunctious little boy, it would have been impossible to get into any sort of misbehaving, just because I was surrounded by a nice, tight village and people that were always looking out for me and ensuring that I had a nice, easy place to land if ever I had thoughts of anything.
And then you ended up in Canada. How come Canada over the United States?
Well, my parents ended up in Canada, and obviously for economic reasons. We all came from somewhere to land in this country. So I think that at the time, my dad looked at the economic opportunity in Oakville, Ontario, and so left Manchester, Jamaica, landed in Oakville, and that's how I come to compete for this country, and this being one of the greatest and one of my most favorite places in the world.
Besides the snow.
Besides the snow is not so bad sometimes when it's warm, but yeah.
Unless you're a skier.
I am a skier and snowboarder, yeah.
Your first love was basketball, though.
First love is always basketball, still is basketball.
So I guess the question is, why sprinting over basketball?
Well, you know what? Listen, I was in sprinting. It was a God-given talent. Any sport that I played, whether it's team or individual sport from I was a child, I was always the most athletic kid amongst all the kids. Basketball, I just fell in love with. I have a passion for it. Also, I think when I just started playing basketball, I was 12 years old, and I just saw it as a challenge. I just saw, it's kind of like how I play golf now. I look at it, and I'm like, I know I can get better. So I just wanted to dedicate myself to that then. And also the friends that I had, they played basketball. So it was the thing that we did as a group.
You got into sprinting a little late for the average sprinter, I guess. So you started your career at Bay Street in Toronto in the 90s.
Right.
But your friends invited you to a regional track meet kind of out of the blue, and you ended up winning the track meets.
Yes.
How important was that in your transition into becoming a professional sprinter that day?
Yeah. Well, listen, first of all, I want to say that I didn't just fall off the truck to be a sprinter. I was a sprinter from I was like 5 years old. I competed at the highest level in Jamaica. I also competed in high school in Canada, where I was one of the best sprinters in Canada. But yeah, it was, I thought I wanted to be a business person. I thought that being locked up in an office, grinding it out, making lots of money was really what I wanted to do. But then, after being in it for a few years, I realized that I still had a calling. There's still this emptiness and void. And so, when I went to go and watch Hopeton Taylor and Andre Metivier trying to make the team, and then I ended up competing, it was probably the transition that allowed me to go from there to be the fastest man in history. But again, sometimes it's important to look at what your calling might be as opposed to what your passion is.
Do you give the listener context? How old were you that day when you won the race kind of out of the blue and started to transition? Oh,
man, I was probably 20 or 21. Yes, and I was playing basketball 5-7 times a day for hours. So yes, I was in exceptionally great shape. So yes, I wasn't sitting at home eating donuts and then I decided I was going to go and run track.
But in the grand scheme of things, that may be a little late for some athletes at 21. They have already quit in some sports. So it was...
Some, you know what? But I never quit. And I think that's part of maybe my whole story. I ran track in high school. I had no passion. I love winning and I love competition. I wasn't focused enough in high school. I was disciplined enough to train hard. But the day that I ran against those guys that were on the national team in Etobicoke, they were on the national team. There were people that were already there on the national team. So for me, it was a test to see where I was. So at 20, I didn't see it as too late. I saw it as, let me just kind of test myself to see where I'm at.
Your dad was a successful businessman as well. You had some, I guess, financial cushion in your life. How important do you think that was to your career, your trajectory, that the fact that you didn't always have to worry about the stress of getting a job right away? My
father always worked very hard. And I think culturally, as a Jamaican, my dad always taught and lived this, was to work really hard and leave the place a better place than when you first started. So, my financial cushion wasn't my financial cushion. My father worked very hard and clearly was going to hand that down at some point, because I think that there are times I bought my father's real estate portfolio, but I had to give him real dollars. I had to give him real dollars for that. So again, it teaches structure, it teaches discipline, and more importantly, it teaches responsibility. And that's what he taught me, and I try to carry that on even through today.
You are a gifted athlete, but there's other gifted athletes in the world. What do you think set you apart from your competitors on the world stage when everybody is athletic?
Well, you know what? In the 100 meters every single year, you watch at the Olympic Games or the World Championships, you're going to see the top 8 male human specimen or female human specimen when you're watching the ladies race. Ultimately, what divides there's going to be someone faster than the other person, but what divides a winner, which I think is a skill, is what's between your ears. And so my mental, psychological preparation with obviously having my coach as an incredible support system, my family is a very incredible support system, that allowed me to step into the blocks at a major championships and let them know that I was very comfortable being there. And it didn't really matter to me because I knew that I could go back to Bay Street if I lost, if I had an injury, whatever happened, or I knew that there's another goal that I have that I know I could achieve. So for me, what separated me from them, or what separated the first from any other place, or what separated winners from people who don't win, really a lot is the psychological confidence and build.
Were you aware of that through the years when you were coming up? Or do you look back on it and you realize that you had the edge psychologically?
No, well, yeah, it's something I've always been born with, man. I mean, and again, maybe not born with, born with, absolutely born with. It's the environment I grew up. I'm number 4 of 5 boys in my family. So we were fighting and competing over every single thing, and you find that with siblings, well, any siblings, anywhere now, you find that there's a level of competition. And when you live in a house that's absolutely filled with testosterone, all boys, my mom and my dad, then yeah, you realize that when you get to a certain place in life, it became quite easy.
Who was Dan Paff?
Oh man, Dan Paff was the greatest coach ever. Dan Paff, the greatest organizer. Dan Paff wasn't just my track coach, because he and I could talk about, because we just talked about psychology. One of the amazing things about Dan and I was he tested me mentally or psychologically every day. And he challenged me to get my life in order, whatever it is that was going on, whether or not I was in a relationship that wasn't working out, I was dealing with an agent that I didn't like, I was dealing with a sponsor who wasn't fulfilling their obligations. Dan was someone that created an environment where I could flourish, where I could train every single day, absorb all the information that he could give me so I could go out and execute in a race that allowed me to be the greatest sprinter in history.
How quickly did it take him to spot you?
Wow. You know what? That's a great question for him. I met Dan in 1991 at our relay camp in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He told me then I had talent. He told me in 1992 I had talent. In 1993, I believed him because I started listening to him. And also because I had come to Calgary the year before and got into a disciplined structure, which is something that he'd always said to me. So when I was mentally ready to be in a disciplined structure, I flew to Baton Rouge to be with Dan. And 6 weeks later, I was one of the top sprinters in the world. And I went from there to be the greatest that ever lived.
Do you think there would have been 2 gold medals without Dan Paff?
I'm confident to say that I'd have been successful. But I also will always praise and respect the people that's been part of my journey. Yeah.
You spent time in Calgary.
Yes.
Which is where we are now.
Right.
What did Calgary do for you in your athletic career?
In 1992, I came here to try out for the Bobsled Association wanted me to try out for the bobsled team. I clearly didn't like jumping in a box and sliding down on an ice sheath, but I clearly loved sprinting. What Calgary taught me, and this is why it's such an incredible, special place for me, is that in order for me to achieve something, I have to be focused and I have to be disciplined. And it was the very first time in my life in 1992 at Canada Olympic Park that I was around a bunch of people who had common goal. And the common goal was, I'm going to be an Olympic champion. And so I didn't know on a daily basis the commitment that it took, but I was welcome in that. And I absorbed that information and I used that when I left to go to train in Baton Rouge in 1994.
Just a quick thank you to one of our sponsors, and we'll be right back to the show. This podcast episode is sponsored by Conate Water Solutions. Do you need cost-effective water sourcing options to supply your next drilling or completions program? Conate Water Solutions is a specialized hydrogeology company focused on water well drilling, testing, and water management services in Western Canada and Texas. Contact info@conatewater.com or check out conatewater.com for more details. Why do so many talented sprinters come from Jamaica, although you came to Canada? What do you think the reason is for that?
The same reason why there's a lot of incredible hockey players come from Canada. In Canada, if you have a child, as soon as that child starts walking, the first thing you think about, and it doesn't matter what culture you are, as long as you're Canadian, you're thinking, I got to get this kid to skate. And in Jamaica, it's the same thing for track and field. Every single person in Jamaica has competed in an event in track and field. And plus, because track and field is what it is, no matter what body you have, there's always an event in track and field for all kids to compete at. So in Jamaica, that's our standard. Everyone does it. This is something that you have to do.
In 1996, when you won the gold medal, I read that you came off to a poor start, at least from your perspective.
Horrible start.
If you hadn't come off that poor start, do you think you would have ran a 9.6?
Well, according to Dan, Dan thought that in Atlanta, I would have ran between 961 and 970.
Wow.
So he thought that. So again, it's not me. He thought that in my preparation. So yes, but I was a second to last guy out of the blocks. I executed the first 30 meters extremely poorly. My top speed was better than anybody else in the world, and actually only to be second now to Usain Bolt. Mm-hmm. So I knew that I would catch and get everybody. But yeah, the time would have been a lot faster.
You're also wearing a big watch. I saw, like, big clunky watch.
Right.
So that maybe you don't do that anymore. If you had not worn that watch, maybe you would have. I don't know. It's a little detail I've noticed when I watched the.
Oh well, it's good that you noticed that detail. I was getting paid a lot of money to wear that watch.
An unlikely connection. You happened to meet George W. Bush when you were training in Austin.
Right.
What was that experience like?
Phenomenal, man. He came to Austin, like, obviously he's the governor of Texas, and every Wednesday he'd come and run a few miles on campus. And he didn't know who I was. And it was just a real funny meeting because he'd come and jog, and of course most people would clear the track. And I'm like, I'm preparing for the I'm preparing for the Olympics. I'm not getting off the track. I don't even know who this guy is. So he came around and he said, who are you and whatever. I was like, I'm the world at the time. I'm the world champion. I was a reigning world champion, and I was preparing for the Olympic Games at the time. And yeah, one of the nicest guys ever, dude. He's such a good guy.
Did you meet his dad, George H.W.?
I did not. I met him. Yeah, I did not meet his dad. No.
Any lessons you took from George W.?
You know what? Maybe, one, real humble guy, and also very down to earth. And one of the things I learned, that no matter how big a stage that you have, just going over and saying hello to somebody sometimes can mean a world of good to them.
Do you ever extend the olive branch to Michael Johnson?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think in thousands of interviews I've done, I think that most people know that I have the utmost respect for Michael Johnson as one of the best speed endurance guys ever, right? I mean, if we're going to talk sport, then we're not going to talk sprints, which is fine. Michael's one of the best 200, 400 meter guys ever. And yeah, I mean, listen, I welcome that at any time whatsoever. Michael's a great guy and great athlete, and has done some fantastic work on the journalism side. He's also an entrepreneur, so again, I mean, good dude. Yeah, why not?
What fulfills you nowadays?
Oh man, the ability to go to sleep every night knowing that I've maximized my day. So whether that is fatherhood, philanthropy, business, raising money, doing something like we did today, which is inspire a room filled with executives about, a cause that is so important to me, which is mentorship. Everything there, for me, I just want to make sure that when I put my head on the pillow that night, that I've fulfilled all of the goals that I set for that day.
Peak of your athletic career. At what period do you think you were at the top?
You know what? Funny. I was having this conversation with Steve Messler. We're having a conversation we're talking about thoughts, ideas, and levels of achievement. Now, at one point, I was the first human being and fastest human being in the world. And funny, I said to him, I think that I'm still, and I do things purposefully every day. And I don't think that I've achieved that goal yet. I don't think that I'm there yet. So I believe even with meeting you and this interview, this is still a journey to the top of something, right? And I'm not every day searching for something. I know that I'm setting goals every single hour of every single day. And I'm purposely doing things, especially with the stage that I'm blessed with. But yes, I still think that peak is coming.
Physically, though? When was that?
Well, I mean, physically, for sure. Physically would have been 1997, the year after the Olympic Games, because I'd never been so focused and disciplined on nutrition, therapy, and training. So that would have been, like, if that's your question about like my body's like, oh my God, I don't even know what my body percentage, my body fat was, but I could see every vein and every muscle in my body, yes.
And on those days, 8 hours of sleep a night to get granular, what do those days look like? You're training all day long or?
Well, yeah, 6 hours a day, 6 to 8 hours a day. Obviously that would include therapy or weightlifting, but yes, I would be, 10 hours of sleep.
On a lighter note, favorite time in your career, athletically or professionally?
Oh, wow. You know what? Probably my favorite time athletically would be, obviously celebrating all my individual goals, but celebrating the team goal with the fellas is probably my favorite moment. I'm a father of 4, so that you got to include that. But you know what? Connecting with old friends. I mean, I'm sitting today with myself, Juanique, Luke, and Gil Jornio. So, I mean, these are good times for me. Like, I mean, anytime I can connect with people and we can have a great laugh, eat a good steak, and have a great cigar, I'm happy.
Do obscure podcasts like this. So,
and you're doing a great job. You asked some great questions. So, hey, why not?
Who do you look towards for advice nowadays? Is there anyone? You don't really need advice, but is there anyone you bounce ideas off of?
You always need advice. And I've got tons of business mentors. What I do, I try to seek out people who are exceptional at what they did. So if I'm going to invest in oil and gas, I would seek out the Donovan Bailey of oil and gas, and I'd have a conversation with him. When I'm doing journalism, Bob Babinski, one of my great, is my media coach. So he's the Dan Paff of coaches, for me. I like to speak to journalists, Tara Sloan and Ron McLean, like some of the incredible people that's been out there. I like to work with them. So yeah, the motivation that I have still is to always associate myself with people that are incredible at what they do, because that's, for me, is the only way that I'm going to continue learning.
Do you remember the day you met Muhammad Ali?
I do, like yesterday. I'm a child. I say I'm a child because I was a child. Meeting someone, I mean, the only sad thing about that day for me was that my father wasn't there. My father wasn't in the room. My father was in Atlanta. But yes, you know what? Yeah, man, it's like today. And for someone who has done such incredible work in the ring, been a fantastic human outside of the ring, and for someone that I look at, when I look at his own personal self-esteem and what he did for my own self-esteem as a child, was incredible. One of the greatest human beings to ever walk the face of the earth.
If you were to leave a listener with one lesson from him, what would you leave them with?
Oh, from him?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Well, I mean, the lesson from him is, if you don't know who he is, shame on you.
No, not many people get to meet him.
Right. Yeah. But I'm just saying to you, shame on you. And ultimately, maximizing, he taught me how to live, how to maximize your life, regardless of what the blowback would be. I can't imagine Muhammad Ali being alive and healthy today and him looking at the world and speaking truth to fact. Wars happening, people dying, it's just stuff happening around the world. And so for me, I learned that from him, that I had to be my authentic self and just speak truth to facts, regardless of what the criticism that might be after.
This is a question for myself. Maybe we'll cut it out, but what would you ask Ben Johnson?
It'll be a really interesting conversation. From a psychological perspective, I want to find out. I mean, I don't need to find out about his training and all that stuff. That's really documented. Yeah, I think that I would probably want to find out mentally and psychologically how he coped or survived after 1988.
You were to give advice to a young athlete or a person in business,
right?
What would you tell them?
Well, I always listen, I love basketball, and I always use the Michael Jordan quote: "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take." It's kind of like you on this podcast.
Yeah.
Right. So ultimately, I think that there should be no one out there that sets limits, no matter what age or stage you are in life or wherever you come from. Do not let that define you, and understand that if you do put the work in, whatever your goals are, you'll get there.
Fair enough. Well, we can end the formal conversation there. I really appreciate your time, Mr. Donovan Bailey, and I know lots of people will too. So thank you.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me. Now I go and have a beer.
Hello, listeners out there. Thanks for checking out the podcast. Hopefully the episode provided some insights. If you enjoyed the show, check out trose.ca where more episodes are yet to come. You can also subscribe to the podcast where your token of support is much appreciated. Until next time, happy coffee drinking.